The autumn wind carried more dust than promise through the streets of Dustwell, Arizona territory. It was the kind of wind that stripped paint from shutters and hope from hearts, leaving everything the color of dried blood and disappointment. Eleanor Ellie Whitfield stood on the makeshift platform outside Garrison's general store, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles had gone white as bone. She was the last one left. The other women had been claimed hours ago. Sarah with her golden curls snatched up by the banker. Martha with her cooking skills by the hotel owner. Even poor limping Anna had found a home with old Cornelius, who needed someone to tend his sheep. But Ellie remained, 24 years old, with a scar on her wrist and eyes that held too much history for comfort. "Going once," Mayor Hutchinson's voice cracked like a whip in the thinning crowd. Sweat ran rivers down his jowls despite the October chill. "Surely someone needs a capable woman for their household." The word capable hung in the air like a question mark. Ellie had arrived on the mail coach 3 weeks prior with a letter of introduction that said precious little, just that she was from Charleston, educated, and seeking new circumstances. In a town where everyone's past was written in the lines of their faces, her silence spoke volumes. The crowd shuffled their feet. Men who'd come looking for wives had already made their choices, and those who remained were here for the spectacle alone. Tommy Briggs, the saloon keeper, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Ain't natural, a woman keeping secrets like that," he muttered loud enough to carry. Ellie lifted her chin. The late afternoon sun caught the pale line across her throat. Another scar, this one older, finer, like someone had drawn on her with a sharp quill. She'd learned long ago that showing fear was like showing blood to wolves. Going twice. A child? Couldn't have been more than 8, tugged at his mother's skirts. "Why don't nobody want her? Ma." "Hush, William." The mother pulled him close, but her eyes stayed fixed on Ellie with that mixture of pity and relief that said, "There but for the grace of God." Mayor Hutchinson raised his gavel, a repurposed hammer that had seen better days. The sound it would make would be final. Unclaimed brides became the town's responsibility, which meant washing dishes at the boarding house for room and board, fending off drunken advances, aging into invisibility. Ellie had seen it before in other towns. She'd sworn it wouldn't be her fate, but here she stood. "Going. I'll take her." The voice came from the back of the crowd, rough as sandpaper, quiet as death, heads turned like a field of sunflowers following the sun. A path opened up, and through it walked a ghost. That's what folks called Cassidy Cass Morgan, though never to his face. 6 feet of sharp angles and hollow spaces, clothes the color of trail dust, eyes like wells that had run dry. He moved through Dustwell like smoke there when you needed horse breaking or fence mending. Gone before you could ask about the wedding band he still wore, or why he lived alone in that cabin by Skeleton Ridge. "You sure about that, Cass?" Mayor Hutchinson's voice climbed an octave. "This here's a serious commitment. A wife ain't like a horse you can return if she don't suit." Cass stopped at the platform's edge. Up close, Ellie could see the premature silver threading through his dark hair, the deep grooves that sorrow had carved around his mouth. He looked up at her with those empty eyes, and she saw something flicker there. Recognition, maybe, of one damaged soul to another. "I'm sure." He pulled out a leather pouch, counted out the bride price in coins that clinked like promises. "That is, if the lady's willing." The lady. When was the last time someone had called her that? Not since Charleston. Certainly, not since the night that ended with blood on marble floors and her brother's voice saying she was no sister of his. Ellie looked out at the crowd, at their eager faces waiting for drama, at the other claimed brides watching from their new husbands' sides, at the vast nothing that awaited her if she said no. Then she looked down at Cass Morgan, the ghost of Dustwell, who was offering her. What? She didn't know, but it had to be better than nothing. "I'm willing," she said. The crowd exhaled collectively, disappointed and relieved in equal measure. Drama had been averted, or perhaps merely postponed. As Ellie descended from the platform, her legs shaky as a newborn colt's, she caught snippets of conversation. Probably murder his last wife. Here she was touched in the head. Match made in hell if you ask me. Cass was already walking away. He didn't offer his arm or even look back, just started down Main Street toward where his wagon waited. After a moment's hesitation, Ellie followed. What else was there to do? The wagon was like the man, functional, weathered, asking no questions. He helped her up with hands that were gentle despite their calluses, then climbed up beside her. As they rolled out of town, Ellie risked a glance back. The platform was already being dismantled, the crowd dispersing to their suppers and gossip. Tomorrow there would be new scandals, new arrivals, new departures. The auction of the unwanted brides would fade into just another Thursday in Dustwell. My place is 5 miles out, Cass said without looking at her. Got a roof that don't leak and a well that don't run dry. That's about all I can promise. That's enough, Ellie replied, and found she meant it. They rode in silence as the sun sank toward the mountains, painting the desert in shades of fire and ash. The only sounds were the creak of wheels and the steady clop of hooves. Neither of them tried to fill the quiet with false pleasantries or hollow promises. They were past that, both of them, past pretending that life was anything other than one long series of survivals. As they turned onto a track that was more suggestion than road, Cass spoke again. That scar on your wrist? Rope. Ellie's hand moved instinctively to cover it. Something like that. He nodded, accepting the non-answer as easily as if she'd told him the whole truth. We all got our marks. Some just show more than others. The cabin materialized from the gathering darkness like something conjured, small but solid, with smoke rising from the chimney in a way that suggested welcome, even if the man beside her didn't. As Cass helped her down from the wagon, Ellie caught sight of a small graveyard on the hillside behind the house. 3 wooden crosses, weathered but tended. She was the last bride left at the border town auction. Then a broken cowboy raised his hand. Now here she stood, at the edge of nowhere with a man who wore his grief like a second skin. And somehow it felt more honest than anything she'd known in years. Come on, Cass said, hefting her single carpet bag like it weighed nothing. Let's get you settled before full dark. Coyotes get bold when the sun goes down. And you look like you've had enough excitement for one day. As Ellie followed him toward the cabin, she thought about coyotes and the kinds of predators that walked on 2 legs. She thought about auction blocks and bride prices and what it meant to be chosen by a ghost. She thought about scarred wrists and empty eyes, and the way sometimes the broken pieces of 2 lives might fit together better than whole ones ever could. The door closed behind them with a sound like finality, shutting out the desert wind and the distant lights of Dustwell. Whatever came next, Ellie thought, at least she wouldn't face it alone. And in the autumn of 1879 in the Arizona Territory where hope was scarcer than water, that was worth more than all the promises in the world. The cabin was smaller inside than it looked from without, but clean in the way of a place maintained by habit rather than hope. One main room served as kitchen, dining, and living space, with a stone fireplace that Cass immediately set to tending. A narrow door led to what Ellie assumed was a bedroom, and a ladder stretched up to a loft overhead. You'll take the bedroom? Cass said without turning from the fireplace. I've been meaning to move my things to the loft anyway. Ellie stood near the door, carpetbag still clutched in both hands, unsure whether to move or speak or simply exist in this space that smelled of wood smoke and leather and something indefinably masculine. The silence stretched between them like taffy, sweet and suffocating. I don't mean to put you out of your own bed, she finally managed. Cass's hand stilled on the kindling. It ain't putting out, just practical. He struck a match, and the small flame threw his profile into sharp relief, all angles and shadows. There's beans and cornbread from yesterday. I'll heat them up once the fire catches. I can cook, Ellie offered quickly. I mean, I'd like to earn my keep. He did turn then, and the look he gave her was unreadable. You don't need to earn anything. You're not a hired hand. Then what am I? The question hung between them, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. Cass went back to his fire, and Ellie finally set down her bag. The room felt too large and too small all at once, like a coat that didn't quite fit. As promised, he heated the beans and cornbread, serving them on plates that matched about as well as she and Cass did, one china, probably a remnant from his past life. One tin. They ate in silence at a table scarred by years of use, and Ellie found herself studying the marks in the wood, imagining the meals that had been eaten here before. The necessaries out back, Cass said when they'd finished. There's a pitcher and basin in the bedroom for washing. Well's got a good pump. No need to haul water unless there's a drought. Instructions. Logistics. Nothing about expectations or arrangements or any of the things that might lurk beneath the surface of this strange marriage. Ellie nodded and began clearing the plates. Leave them, he said. I'll do them later. I don't mind. Leave them. Not harsh. Exactly, but firm. He stood, grabbed a blanket from a chest near the fireplace, and headed for the door. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. Bar the door behind me. Ellie blinked. The barn. Got a cot out there. Use it sometimes when the horses are foaling. He paused at the threshold, silhouetted against the purple dusk. There's wolves in these hills, and worse things than wolves. Bar the door. Then he was gone, leaving Ellie alone in the cabin with the crackling fire and the dirty dishes and 1,000 questions crawling up her throat like spiders. She barred the door. The bedroom was sparse but clean, a bed with a quilt that had seen better decades, a dresser with a cracked mirror, a washstand. Cass's things were already gone, moved so quickly she hadn't noticed. Only the indent on the pillow suggested anyone had ever slept here at all. Ellie sat on the edge of the bed, still in her traveling dress, and tried to make sense of the day. This morning she'd been town property. Afternoon saw her sold like livestock, and now night found her married to a ghost who slept in barns. The absurdity of it all bubbled up, and she found herself laughing, a cracked, desperate sound that echoed off the walls. Through the single window, she could see the faint glow of lantern light from the barn. Was he sitting up too, wondering what madness had possessed him to raise his hand at the auction? Or was this normal for him, this careful distance, this deliberate isolation? Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion was a powerful force. Ellie lay down fully clothed, the quilt pulled up to her chin, and listened to the night sounds win through the canyon, the distant yip of coyotes, the settling of old wood. Somewhere in the darkness, her husband kept his vigil in a barn, and she was grateful for it. Grateful for the space, the silence, the absence of expectations. She woke to gray pre-dawn light and the sound of someone moving quietly in the main room. Through the cracked door, she could see Cass rebuilding the fire, his movements economical and practiced. He'd already been to the well. A bucket of fresh water sat by the stove. Ellie rose, smoothed her wrinkled dress as best she could, and ventured out. Cass looked up but didn't speak, just nodded toward the coffee pot beginning to heat on the stove. Did you sleep at all? She asked. Some. He fed another log to the fire. Some. And so began their first full day as husband and wife, if such terms could apply to their arrangement. Cass showed her around the property, the chicken coop with its half-dozen scraggly hens, the garden plot that had gone mostly to seed, the root cellar built into the hillside. He spoke only when necessary, pointing out practical things where the snake den was to avoid, which plants the horses wouldn't eat, how to work the pump if it stuck. I've got fence to mend on the north pasture, he said finally. Be gone most of the day. There's supplies in the pantry if you're minded to cook. He didn't wait for a response, just collected his tools and headed out. Ellie watched him go, This strange man who'd claimed her but seemed to want nothing from her, and wondered if this was what her life would be. An endless series of days marked by absence rather than presence. But she was nothing if not practical. Charleston might have bred her for parlor conversation and watercolors, but the years since had taught her harder lessons. She rolled up her sleeves and set to work. By the time Cass returned at dusk, the cabin had been transformed. Not dramatically, she had little to work with, but the floors were swept, the windows cleaned, the dishes not just washed, but organized. She'd found flour and lard in the pantry, managed to coax the temperamental stove into cooperation, and had biscuits browning beside a pot of rabbit stew made from preserves she'd discovered in the root cellar. Cass stopped in the doorway, his expression shifting through several emotions too quickly for Ellie to catalog. "You didn't need to." "I wanted to." She wiped her hands on an apron she'd found hanging behind the door. "I told you I could cook." They ate together again, and this time the silence felt less strained. Cass even complimented the biscuits, which Ellie counted as a major victory. After dinner, he started to collect the plates. "I'll do them." Ellie said, "Fair's fair, I cook. You clean wouldn't work if you're not here to cook." A ghost of a smile tugged at his mouth. "Suppose that's logical." While she washed, he sat by the fire cleaning his rifle, the familiar motions seeming to soothe him. The domestic scene was almost normal if she squinted, like looking at life through water. "That scar on your throat," he said suddenly. "Someone tried to hurt you." Ellie's hand stilled in the soapy water. She'd wondered when he'd ask. "My brother, when I refused to marry the man he'd chosen." The words came out flat, matter of fact. "Said I was better off dead than defiant. He the one who sent you west." In a manner of speaking, hard to stay in a place where your own blood wants you gone. Cass was quiet for a long moment. Family can cut deeper than strangers ever could. There was weight in those words. History she wasn't ready to ask about. Instead, she finished the dishes and dried her hands. "I think I'll turn in." "I'll be out directly," he said, already reaching for his barn blanket. "Cass," she turned at the bedroom door. "How long are you planning to sleep in the barn?" He looked up, firelight dancing across his weathered features. "Long as it takes." "Takes for what?" "For you to stop jumping every time I move, for that look to leave your eyes, the one that's calculating exits." He went back to his rifle. "I've seen spooked horses with that same look. Time and patience. That's what they need. Reckon it's the same with people." Ellie felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of bonds she hadn't realized were there. "And if I never stop jumping, then I'll get real good at sleeping in barns." That night, she left the bedroom door open a crack. Not an invitation, exactly, but an acknowledgement. Through the gap, she could see him sitting by the dying fire, keeping watch over nothing and everything. He'd moved the rifle to lean against the door protection offered without being asked. She thought about broken things and patient hands, about the distance between a bedroom and a barn, about men who understood that sometimes the kindest thing you could do was leave someone alone. Her brother had tried to own her, control her, shape her into something useful. Cass seemed content to simply let her exist. It wasn't love. It might never be love. But it was something, a quiet understanding between two damaged souls, a bargain struck not in words but in silence. Outside, wolves howled in the hills, and Ellie pulled the quilt higher. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new negotiations of space and expectation. But tonight, she was safe in a bed that wasn't hers, in a house that might someday feel like home, married to a ghost who kept his distance out of kindness rather than indifference. It was, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, more than she'd dared hope for when she stood on that platform as the last bride on the block. And for now, it was enough. The weeks folded into each other like pages in a book, each day writing its own small story of shared silence and careful distance. October bled into November, bringing cold mornings that painted frost on the windows and made the walk to the chicken coop an exercise in determination. Ellie had fallen into the rhythm of the place up before dawn to start the fire. Coffee brewing by the time Cass returned from checking the horses. Breakfast eaten in companionable quiet before he headed out to whatever work the ranch demanded. He still slept in the barn, though she'd noticed he'd moved a few more blankets out there as the nights grew colder. It was on one such morning, the air sharp enough to cut, that she found him sitting on the porch steps, working leather with hands that barely trembled in the cold. "What are you making?" she asked, wrapping her shawl tighter. He held up the piece, a glove. She realized, small and carefully stitched. "Winter's coming on hard. Noticed your hands were getting raw from the washing." Ellie stared at the glove, at the neat stitches that must have taken hours by lamplight. "You're making me gloves." A flush crept up his neck. "Ain't nothing fancy, just practical." But it wasn't just practical. She could see that in the careful measurement of the fingers, the soft rabbit fur he'd lined them with, the way he'd reinforced the palms where she'd wear them thin with work. It was consideration made tangible, care translated into leather and thread. "Thank you," she said softly. He grunted, going back to his stitching. "Try it on. Need to know if it fits before I finish the other one." The glove fit perfectly, and Ellie flexed her fingers, marveling at the warmth. "How did you know the size?" "Been watching." He didn't look up. "Way you hold your coffee cup. Handle the reins when you feed the chickens. Hands tell a lot about a person." "What do mine tell?" Now he did look up, those empty eyes not quite so empty anymore. "That you've known work, but not always. That you're stronger than you look. That you're careful with things that matter." The moment stretched between them, delicate as frost. Before Ellie cleared her throat, "The chickens." "Yeah." But she wore the glove to feed them. And when she came back, he was smiling, just a little. Just enough to transform his face from stone to something almost soft. The trip to town later that week was necessary. Supplies were running low, and winter wouldn't wait for their comfort. Ellie had dreaded it, knowing how tongues would wag. But Cass had simply helped her into the wagon like any husband might, his hand steady on her elbow. "Let them talk," he said as they rolled down Main Street. "Been doing it for years anyway." But the talk was different than Ellie expected. Yes, there were stares and whispers, but also something else, a grudging respect, perhaps, or simple curiosity. At the general store, Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, even nodded to her. "Heard you've got Cass Morgan eating regular meals again," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Man was like to waste away before you came along." Ellie didn't know how to respond to that, so she simply selected her flour and beans and tried not to think about Cass before, alone in that cabin with his ghosts. It was while Cass loaded the wagon that trouble found them. 3 cowboys, drunk despite the early hour, stumbled out of the saloon. Ellie recognized the type young men with too much pride and too little sense, looking for any excuse to prove themselves. "Well, well," the tallest one slurred. "Ghost Morgan found himself a woman. Didn't think you had it in you, old man." Cass didn't respond, just kept loading sacks of grain with methodical precision. "Hey," the cowboy grabbed Cass's shoulder. "I'm talking to you. What'd you do? Promise her your wife's jewelry. Heard you kept it all, even her wedding." Cass moved so fast Ellie barely saw it. One moment the cowboy was standing. The next, he was on his back in the dirt, Cass's boot on his chest. "Don't," Cass's voice was quiet, terrible. "Don't speak of her, not ever." "Cass!" Ellie stepped forward, placed a hand on his arm. The muscle underneath was iron, trembling with restraint. "He's not worth it." For a heartbeat, she thought he wouldn't listen. Then, slowly, he stepped back. The cowboy scrambled up, pride wounded more than anything else, and slunk away with his friends. They rode home in silence. But it was different now. Charged. Electric. Ellie could feel the fury radiating off him, could see it in the white of his knuckles on the reins. "I'm sorry," she said finally. For what? For whatever they stirred up about your wife. His jaw worked. Margaret. Her name was Margaret. It was the first time he'd said the name aloud in her presence. Ellie waited, sensing more words gathering like storm clouds. She was everything soft in this hard place. Came out from Boston to teach school, and I couldn't believe she looked twice at me. But she did. His voice cracked. Had 2 boys, Samuel and James, 6 and 4 when... He couldn't finish, but he didn't need to. Ellie had seen the 3 crosses on the hill. The fever, she asked gently. Indians. The word came out flat, emotionless. Raiding party hit while I was away, came back to ashes, and them. Ellie's hand found his on the reins, covered it. He didn't pull away. That's why they call me Ghost Morgan. Died that day too, just kept walking around after. He looked at her then, really looked at her. Until you... Me? Standing on that platform, trying so hard not to let them see you break, reminded me of, not her, nothing like her, but of fighting when everything in you wants to quit. He turned his hand under hers, laced their fingers together, figured maybe 2 ghosts could make something resembling a life. They held hands the rest of the way home, and when they arrived, Ellie did something impulsive. As Cass headed for the barn with his blankets, she called out, It's too cold for the barn. He stopped. Ellie, I'm not asking for anything, but there's a perfectly good floor by the fireplace, and you'll catch your death out there. He stood there, silhouetted against the barn door, torn between old habits and new possibilities. Finally, slowly, he nodded. That night, he made his bed by the fire while she took the bedroom, but she left the door open wide, and sometime in the small hours, she heard him add another log to the fire, keeping the cold at bay for both of them. In the morning, she found something on the kitchen table, the 2nd glove, finished, with a note in careful handwriting, for hands that are learning to build instead of break. She put both gloves on and started breakfast, humming softly. When Cass came in from the morning chores, drawn by the smell of coffee and bacon, he stopped in the doorway again, but this time, he was smiling. Those gloves suit you, he said. They're perfect. She poured his coffee, noticing how he no longer flinched when she moved near him. Thank you. Plenty more leather where that came from. Could make you a proper pair of riding gloves. If you'd like. Maybe teach you to ride would make getting around easier. It was the most he'd offered, the closest he'd come to suggesting a future that went beyond mere survival. Ellie felt something bloom in her chest, tender and tentative as the first green shoots after winter. I'd like that, she said. They ate breakfast together, planning the day's work, and if anyone had looked through the window, they might have seen what appeared to be an ordinary married couple starting their day. The truth was more complicated. 2 damaged people slowly learning to trust, to share space, to build something from the ashes of their separate griefs. The gloves sat on the table between them, leather worn soft with care, stitched with patience and something that might, given time, grow into love, outside. The November wind howled its warnings of winter, but inside, the fire was warm and the coffee was strong and the silence between them had transformed from empty to full. Small gestures. Ellie thought, small gestures building bridges across the careful distances they maintained. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were no grand declarations or passionate embraces, but it was real as leather and thread, as solid as a well-made glove that fit just right. And sometimes, real was better than any fairy tale could ever be. December brought the first snow, light as flower dust on the ground, and with it came a night that would change everything. Ellie had noticed Cass growing quieter as the month wore on, his silences deeper, his sleep by the fire more restless. She'd wake to hear him pacing, the floorboards creaking under his weight like a ship in storm. It was 3 days before Christmas when the dam finally broke. She woke to the smell of smoke, not the comforting wood smoke of the fireplace, but something acrid, wrong. Through her open door, she could see Cass hunched by the hearth, feeding papers to the flames. His shoulders shook with what might have been cold but wasn't. "Cass," she wrapped her shawl around her nightgown and ventured out. He didn't turn. "Go back to bed, Ellie." But she could see what he was burning, letters, dozens of them, the ink running like tears as the flames consumed them. One fell to the hearth, and she glimpsed careful feminine handwriting before he snatched it back to the fire. Margaret's letters. Christmas letters. She'd write them every year to her sister back east, telling about our life here. Never mailed the ones after. His voice broke. Found them in her writing desk. Every year she'd tell about the boys growing, about the ranch, about me. Ellie sank down beside him on the floor. Close, but not touching. "Why burn them?" "Because I can't keep reading them. Can't keep pretending she's going to walk through that door with Samuel on her hip and James tugging at her skirts." He fed another letter to the flames. 5 years. Ellie. 5 years of being haunted by words on paper. "Tell me about it." The words came out soft but firm. "Not the end. Tell me about the beginning." He looked at her then, eyes red-rimmed and lost. "Why?" "Because they lived. Because they were more than how they died. Because you loved them. And that matters." For a long moment, he stared at her. Then, slowly, like a rusty gate opening, he began to talk. Margaret came out on the teacher contract in 71. Prettiest thing I'd ever seen. Standing at the stagecoach stop in a dress too fine for dust and a hat that the wind tried to steal 3 times before she even made it to the schoolhouse. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I was contracted to build new desks for the school. Took me 3 months to finish what should have been 2 weeks' work, just so I could keep seeing her." Ellie pulled her knees up, making herself small and unthreatening, a safe space for his words to land. She was so patient with those children. Apache, Mexican, white, didn't matter to her. Every child could learn. She said, even started teaching some of the mothers in the evening, said education was the only way this territory would ever be more than dirt and dreams. Another letter went into the flames, but gentler now, like a burial rather than a destruction. "Samuel was born in 74, came out squalling and hasn't stopped since." He caught himself, swallowed hard. "Hadn't stopped, was talking by 10 months, walking by 11. Margaret said he'd be a scholar like her. James came in 76 quiet as his brother was loud. Had my eyes, she said, could watch a horse for hours, happy as could be." The tears came then, silent tracks down his weathered face. "I wasn't always a good man. Ellie, before Margaret, I rode with the cavalry, did things in the name of civilization that weren't civilized at all. She knew. Somehow she always knew. But she loved me anyway. Said every soul deserved a chance at redemption." "The raid," Ellie prompted gently when he fell silent. "Been tracking rustlers for 3 days. They hit while I was gone. The Apache, they were just boys themselves. Really angry, desperate boys whose families had been pushed off their land. Scattered to the winds. They saw a white settlement, saw a chance for supplies. For revenge." His hands clenched, unclenched. "I found them after. The raiders. Could have killed them all. Had my rifle, had cause, but I kept hearing Margaret's voice, talking about cycles of violence, about how hatred only breeds more hatred. So I let them go." "That was brave." "That was stupid. Town turned on me after that. Said I valued Apache lives over my own family. Said I was a coward, a traitor. Started calling me Ghost Morgan because I was dead to them." He looked at the last letter in his hands. Maybe they were right. Maybe if I'd been more of a man, less of a philosopher, my family would still be alive. Or maybe you just have more blood on your hands in the same empty house. Ellie surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. You think Margaret would have wanted you to become a killer in her name. I became one anyway. After, joined up with men hunting Apache. Any Apache. Didn't matter if they were the same band or not. We burned. He stopped, shuddering. 3 villages, women, children, elders who couldn't run fast enough, all in the name of justice that was really just rage wearing a badge. The last letter trembled in his hands. Ellie could see the date December 23rd, 1874. Margaret's last Christmas letter, probably written days before she died. Read it, Ellie said, out loud. Give her words air one last time before you let them go. Cass's hands shook as he unfolded the paper. His voice, when it came, was raw. Dearest sister, another Christmas in our desert home, and I must tell you, it grows more beautiful each year. The snow on the mountains makes them look like cake frosted by angels. Cassidy built us the most wonderful nativity from wood and cloth. He claims he has no artistic talent, but you should see the care in every carved line. Samuel insists on moving the wise men closer each day, though he's also tried to add his toy soldiers to guard the manger. James just smiles at everything. Our little philosopher. Cassidy remains my greatest gift. He struggles still with his past, but each day I see him choose kindness over bitterness, hope over despair. The territory is hard on souls, but he refuses to let it harden his. I pray nightly that our boys inherit his strength and his gentle heart beneath it all. Give my love to Mother. Tell her we are happy, truly happy, in our wild home. Perhaps next Christmas you might visit the desert blooms in ways you cannot imagine. All my love, Margaret. The letter crumbled to ash in the flames. Cass doubled over as if struck, and Ellie moved without thinking, gathering him against her. He was bigger, stronger, but in that moment he folded into her like a child, shaking with 5 years of grief finally allowed to surface. She thought I was good, he choked out. Even after everything, she thought I was good. You are good. Ellie stroked his hair. This man who'd bought her freedom and asked nothing in return, who made gloves to save her hands and slept on floors to save her fear. A bad man wouldn't grieve like this. A bad man wouldn't care. They sat that way until the fire burned low, until his shaking stopped and his breathing evened out. When he finally pulled back, his face was ravaged but somehow cleaner, like a wound finally washed. I'm sorry, he said. You don't need my ghosts haunting you too. There are ghosts now. She touched his face, thumb brushing away the last tear. That's what marriage is. Isn't it sharing the haunting? He caught her hand, held it against his cheek. Ellie, I need to tell you something. About the villages we burned. There was a girl, couldn't have been more than 16. She looked at me while the flames. She looked at me like Margaret would have, like she saw who I used to be, who I could have been. I see her every night, her and all the others. Do you want absolution? I want to deserve it. Then live like you do. Choose kindness over bitterness, hope over despair. Be the man Margaret saw. Be the man I'm starting to see. He studied her face in the dying firelight. How did you get so wise? Pain's a teacher if you let it be. My brother tried to own me, control me, make me small. I could have let that break me. Some days it nearly did, but broken things can choose how they mend. She squeezed his hand. We're mending, Cass, slow and painful, but mending nonetheless. He lifted their joined hands, kissed her knuckles with infinite gentleness. Will you help me with something? Anything. He rose, pulled her to her feet. Help me make new memories, Christmas ones, for them, but also for us. They spent the next 3 days preparing a Christmas the cabin hadn't seen in 5 years. Cass carved new decorations while Ellie baked with their meager supplies, making the place smell of cinnamon and hope. On Christmas Eve, they stood together at the 3 graves on the hill, and Cass told his family about Ellie, about her strength, her kindness, her gloves that he'd made, and the way she hummed while she cooked. I think you'd like her, he said to the wind. I think you'd be happy I'm not alone." That night, for the first time, he didn't make his bed by the fire. When Ellie woke on Christmas morning, she found him asleep in the chair by her bed, keeping watch as he'd kept watch over the flames. His hand rested near hers on the quilt, not touching but close enough that she could feel the warmth. She laced their fingers together and let him sleep, this good man haunted by his efforts to be better. Outside, snow began to fall in earnest, covering the desert in forgiveness white as any prayer. The ghosts were still there. They always would be. But they were quieter now, appeased by truth and tears and the slow, careful love growing between two people who'd learned that sometimes the only way forward was through the fire. When Cass finally woke, blinking in the white light of winter morning, Ellie smiled. "Merry Christmas." He squeezed her hand, and in his eyes she saw not emptiness but possibility. "Merry Christmas, wife." It was the first time he'd called her that, in the holy hush of Christmas morning, with the ghosts of love and loss bearing witness. It sounded like a promise of all the mornings yet to come. January came with bitter winds and news of trouble. Cass heard it first at the trading post, raids on settlements to the south. Cavalry patrols increased, old wounds reopening between the Apache bands and the encroaching settlers. The fragile peace that had held since the Treaty of '77 was crumbling like sun-baked clay. "It's starting again," he said that night, staring into the fire. They'd taken to sharing the main room in the evenings now, Ellie mending or reading while Cass worked leather or cleaned tack. "The killing—" "Maybe it won't reach here," Ellie offered, though she could see the doubt in his eyes. "It always reaches everywhere, eventually." 3 days later, they woke to smoke on the southern horizon. Not the gentle smoke of hearth fires, but the black pillars that meant destruction. Cass saddled his horse before Ellie could even start breakfast. "Stay inside," he said, checking his rifle. "Bar the door. If I'm not back by nightfall." "You'll be back." She handed him a bundle of food, tried not to let her hands shake. "Just be careful." He touched her cheek, a gesture that had become familiar in the weeks since Christmas. "Always am." But when he returned near sunset, his face told a different story. He unsaddled his horse in silence, movements heavy with what he'd seen. "The Hendricks place," he said finally. "Burned. Family got out in time, but barely." "Apache?" He nodded, then shook his head. "Young ones. Breakaway band. The Army calls them. Warriors who won't accept the reservation boundaries, watching their people starve while settlers graze cattle on what used to be hunting grounds." He slumped against the barn wall. "Can't say I blame them. Can't say I don't understand." That night, Ellie woke to voices in the yard. She crept to the window, saw Cass by the well talking to 3 men on horseback. Even in the moonlight, she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Need every gun we can get," one rider was saying. "These savages won't stop until we stop them." "Or until we stop taking everything they have," Cass replied. "Jesus, Morgan, not this again. They killed your family. How can you—" "Because killing more won't bring them back." Cass's voice was steady, implacable. "Find someone else for your hunting party." "You're a coward," another rider spat. "Always were, always will be." "Maybe, but I'll be a living coward who can sleep at night." After they left, Ellie found him still by the well, head bowed. She approached carefully, the frozen ground crunching under her feet. "They're not wrong," he said without looking up. "About me being a coward." "There's different kinds of courage." She pulled her shawl tighter. "Takes a brave man to say no to violence when everyone expects yes. Or a fool." He finally met her eyes. "They'll be back. Men like that always come back, especially when they smell blood in the water." He was right. Over the next weeks, the situation deteriorated. More raids, more retaliation. The Army increased patrols, but they were looking for war, not peace. Cass refused every call to join the militias forming in town. and their isolation grew. Supplies from town came with cold looks and colder words. It was a February dawn when everything changed. Ellie was gathering eggs when she saw them. 5 Apache warriors on the ridge above the ranch, still as carved stone. Her heart hammered as she slowly backed toward the house. Basket forgotten. "Cass," she called softly. "Company." He emerged from the barn, took in the situation with a glance. "Get inside." "No." The word surprised them both. "If you're staying out here, so am I." Before he could argue, the warriors began descending. Cass stepped forward, hands visible but near his gun. The lead warrior was older than the others, gray threading through his hair, scars mapping a lifetime of conflict across his face. They stopped 20 feet away. The leader studied Cass for a long moment, then spoke in accented English. "You are the one who let our young men go." Ellie's breath caught. These were the raiders who'd killed Margaret and the boys. Or their kin, at least. "I am," Cass said simply. "Why?" "Because enough blood had been spilled. Because my wife wouldn't have wanted more death in her name." The Apache leader dismounted, a gesture that made the younger warriors shift nervously. "My nephew was among those boys, hot-headed, angry, stupid with grief for his own losses." He stepped closer. "He lives because of you. And my family is dead because of him." Cass's voice held pain, but no hatred. "That ledger can't be balanced." "No, but perhaps it can be closed." The leader reached into his pouch, pulled out something that caught the morning light. Margaret's locket. Ellie recognized it from Cass's descriptions. The Apache held it out. "This was wrong to take. The young do not always understand what should be left with the dead." Cass's hand trembled as he took the locket. Inside, Ellie knew, were tiny portraits of Samuel and James, painted by a traveling artist the year before they died. "Thank you," Cass managed. The Apache leader nodded, then looked at Ellie. "Your woman." "My wife." "Good. A man should not walk alone with ghosts." He remounted, but before turning to go, added, "There will be fighting in these hills. Soon, the young ones, the angry ones. They will not listen to old men counseling patience, nor will yours. But this place will be left alone." "Why?" Ellie found herself asking. The leader looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "Because some things are sacred. Because a man who chooses mercy over revenge has earned mercy in return. Because the dead rest easier when the living choose peace." He raised his hand in farewell. "May your ghosts be quiet." Morgan. They watched the warriors disappear over the ridge. Cass stood frozen, the locket clenched in his fist, until Ellie gently pried his fingers open. "Let me see them," she said. The portraits were tiny, perfect, 2 boys with their mother's smile and their father's eyes, forever captured in paint and memory. Cass made a sound like breaking, and Ellie pulled him close. "She would be proud," she whispered, "of what you chose, of who you've become." That night, as reports came of skirmishes throughout the territory, their ranch stood untouched, true to the Apache leader's word. It became an island of peace in an ocean of conflict. Riders passed by without stopping. War parties gave it wide berth. "They think the place is cursed," Cass said one evening, watching distant fires bloom on the horizon. "Ghost Morgan's ranch, where the dead walk. Let them think it." Ellie was learning to bake bread the way Margaret used to, from recipes she'd found written in the margins of a Bible. Better cursed than burned. But the real change was in Cass himself. The return of the locket had closed something, sealed a wound that had bled for 5 years. He began speaking of the future again, improvements to the ranch. Maybe buying more cattle come spring. He moved his things into the bedroom, though he still slept in the chair, unwilling or unable to cross that final distance. One night, as February bled into March and the worst of the violence seemed to be passing, Ellie woke to find him standing at the window, locket open in his hand. Can't sleep. He shook his head. Just thinking. About cycles. About choices. About how that Apache leader's nephew might have children someday. And they'll grow up knowing their father lived because someone chose mercy. He closed the locket gently. Margaret always said the only way to change the world was one choice at a time. She sounds wise. She was... You are too? He turned from the window. Ellie, I need to ask you something. This marriage. It started as convenience, protection, but now... He crossed to her, knelt by the bed so their eyes were level. Now I find myself thinking about you when you're not there, worrying when you're out of sight, looking forward to your voice in the morning and your humming at night. If that's not love, it's close enough to scare me. Ellie's heart raced. Cassie? I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. God knows we've both got enough scars. But I'd like to try. To be a real husband. If you'll have me. To build something new on all this broken ground. She studied his face in the moonlight. This man who'd saved her from a worse fate. Who'd shown her patience and kindness and the terrible cost of choosing peace in a violent world. He wasn't handsome in the classical sense. Wasn't young or unmarked by life. But he was good. Deeply and truly good. In a way few men bothered to be. Yes, she said simply, and watched wonder bloom across his features. That night, for the first time, he lay beside her in the bed, careful, respectful, but present. They didn't make love. Not yet, that would come later, when the last walls fell. But they held each other as the territory burned and healed around them. Two survivors building something new from the ashes of their separate griefs. In the morning, smoke still marked the horizon, but their ranch stood whole. The war would pass, as wars do, leaving new scars and new ghosts. But here, in this small pocket of peace bought with mercy and remembered with grace, love was taking root. The ghosts, for once, were quiet. Spring arrived with wildflowers and danger in equal measure. The Apache conflicts had quieted to an uneasy truce, but desperate men displaced by war don't simply vanish. They find new ways to survive. Some turn to cattle rustling, others to worse occupations. Ellie first noticed something wrong when she went to gather the eggs one April morning. Fresh boot prints in the mud by the coop. Too large to be Cass's. Too recent to be from any visitor they'd had. She mentioned it at breakfast. Watched Cass's face tighten. Could be nothing, he said. But that evening he cleaned both rifles and started barring the door again at night. 3 days later, Cass rode to town for supplies. Ellie stayed behind to tend the garden, the Spencer rifle propped within easy reach. The sun was high and hot, making her grateful for the shade of the broad-brimmed hat Cass had bought her last month. She was thinking about their quiet life, how it had deepened from mere survival into something approaching contentment, when the shadow fell across her plantings. Well, pretty little thing, ain't you? She looked up to find 3 men standing between her and the house. Rough men, trail-worn and mean-eyed. The kind the war had made too many of. The one who'd spoken had yellow teeth and breath she could smell from 6 feet away. My husband will be back soon, she said, proud of how steady her voice came out. That's so, the second man, taller and leaner, smiled without humor. We've been watching. No, he went to town. Won't be back for hours yet. The third man, silent until now, was studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Seen you before, he said suddenly. Charleston, the Whitfield house. You're the sister what caused all that scandal. Ellie's blood went cold. Of all the devils to find her here, in this desert sanctuary. Heard there was a reward, the man continued. Family wants you back, or proof you ain't coming back. Either way pays the same. I'm a married woman now, she said, inching toward the rifle. Whatever business you think you have. Yellowteeth lunged. Ellie dove for the Spencer, got her hands on it, but the tall one kicked it away. She fought, Lord, how she fought! But 3 against 1 was no contest. They bound her hands, stuffed a rag in her mouth, and the one from Charleston produced a length of rope. Could make this quick, he mused. But the brother, he was specific about wanting you to suffer first. For anything. Cass wouldn't be back for hours. By then. The tall one was fashioning the rope into a noose when hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Not one horse, several. What the hell? Yellow Teeth peered through the barn door, then jerked back. Morgan's back, and he ain't alone. Through the gap in the walls, Ellie could see Cass dismounting, flanked by two other men, the Apache leader from February and a younger warrior. They moved with deadly purpose to press a knife to her throat. One sound and you're done. But Cass knew his home. His voice changed. Rush him when they about his friendship and brutal. Detective fury. The Apache warriors were no less efficient. Yellow Teeth went down with a knife between his ribs. The tall one tried to run, made it 3 steps before an Apache war club ended his flight. The one from Charleston, though, he kept his knife at Ellie's throat, backing toward the door. Let me go, he bargained, or I open her neck. Cass stopped, hands spread, but his eyes were terrible. You're the one her brother sent. I'll let you breathe, for now. Cass's voice was soft. Apache, maybe you heard what they do to men who hurt women. The kidnapper's hand trembled. The Apache leader spoke and understand the words. The tone was clear. Promise, threat, certainty. Here's what's going to happen. Cass continued. You're going to let her go. Then you're going to get on your horse and ride. Back to Charleston. Back to Field that his sister is dead. And if I don't, the younger Apache war that sounded like a promise of horrors. Then my friends here will find you. Cass translated. Might take a month, might take a year, but they'll find you, and when they do, you'll wish I'd killed you clean today. The knife wavered, lowered. The kidnapper shoved Ellie forward and ran. They heard his horse's hoofbeats fade into the distance, riding hard for anywhere else. Cass caught Ellie as she stumbled, cut her bonds with shaking hands. The moment the gag was out, she gasped. How did you know? Saw their horses hidden in the wash. Apache saw them first. Actually, came to warn me. We've been watching each other's backs since February. The Apache leader nodded to Ellie. You fought well, like a warrior. Not well enough, she said, rubbing her wrists. Well enough to stay alive. That is all that matters. After they'd dealt with the bodies, Ellie didn't ask how, didn't want to know, and the Apache had melted back into the desert. Cass and Ellie sat on the porch in the gathering dusk. She could feel him vibrating beside her. Aftermath of violence and fear still coursing through him. I thought I'd lost you, he said finally. When I saw that barn door open, when you didn't answer, he covered his face with his hands. I can't do it again. Ellie, I can't lose another. You didn't. She pulled his hands down, made him look at her. You saved me. Again. Your brother thinks I'm dead now. That man might be scum, but he's smart scum. He'll take the money and run. She touched the small cut on her throat where the knife had pressed. It's over. Is it? Cass pulled her against him, holding tight. Because I keep thinking how close it was. Minutes, seconds. If the Apache hadn't seen those horses. If I hadn't come back early. But you did. She breathed him in, leather and gunpowder and the sweet sage smell of him. You did, and I'm here, and we're alive. That night, neither of them pretended about separate sleeping arrangements. When darkness fell, Cass led her to their bed and held her like she might vanish, like she was made of smoke and wishes. They still didn't make love, both too shaken, too raw, but something shifted between them. The last walls crumbled under the weight of almost loss. Marry me, he said suddenly in the darkness. We're already married. No, really marry me. In the church in town, with words that matter and promises we mean. Not because you needed saving or I needed something. Because I love you. Ellie Morgan. Because I want to wake up next to you for the next 40 years. Because you've made me remember what it feels like to hope. She found his face in the darkness, kissed him soft and sure. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. They were married again 2 weeks later, in the tiny adobe church with half the town in attendance. The same people who'd whispered about them 6 months ago now smiled and threw rice. Even Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes during the vows. The Apache leader came, standing at the back in his finest clothes, a gesture of respect that silenced any objections. He left a wedding gift on their wagon, a beautifully beaded blanket and a simple note for warmth and new beginnings. That night, as Ellie lay in her husband's arms in their marriage bed, she thought about journeys, about a girl who'd fled Charleston in disgrace and fear, who'd stood on an auction block as the last unwanted bride, who'd been saved by a ghost and had saved him in return, about a man who'd lost everything and chosen mercy over vengeance, who'd made space in his haunted heart for new love. "What are you thinking?" Cass asked, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things. Philosophy now." She laughed, rich and full. "Would you prefer poetry?" "I'd prefer you," he said, and proceeded to show her exactly how much. Outside, the desert bloomed with spring flowers, and the ghosts, finally, were at peace. The letter arrived on a sweltering July morning, carried by a special courier who looked distinctly uncomfortable in his Eastern clothes. Ellie saw him coming from the kitchen window, his fine black suit already dusty from the ride, and something cold settled in her stomach. "Cass," she called. "Company." He emerged from the barn, took one look at the approaching rider, and moved to stand beside her. 6 months of true marriage had taught them to read each other's moods like weather signs, and he could sense her tension. The courier dismounted stiffly, pulled out a leather portfolio. "I'm looking for Eleanor Whitfield." "No one here by that name," Cass said evenly. "Eleanor Morgan, then formerly Whitfield." The man had the kind of persistent politeness that came with good pay. "I have documents requiring her signature." Ellie stepped forward. "I'm Eleanor Morgan." The courier's eyes swept over her. The simple calico dress, the sun-bronzed skin, the calluses on her hands, and she saw him trying to reconcile this ranch wife with whatever description he'd been given. Finally, he handed her an envelope sealed with black wax. "My condolences, ma'am. I've been instructed to wait for your response." With trembling fingers, Ellie broke the seal. The letter was in her cousin Josephine's careful script. "Dearest Eleanor, it is with deepest regret that I write to inform you of Edward's passing. Your brother succumbed to yellow fever 3 weeks past. Whatever differences lay between you, I hope you will take comfort in knowing his final days were peaceful. As you are aware, Edward died without legitimate issue, by the terms of your father's will. In such circumstances, the estate passes to you, Mr. Hartwell of Hartwell and Associates will explain the particulars, but immediate decisions must be made regarding the property, the business interests, and substantial financial holdings. I have taken the liberty of making arrangements for your return journey. Charleston society has short memory for scandal when fortune is involved. You need not fear the reception that awaits you. Your presence is urgently required. Affectionately, Josephine." Ellie read it twice, 3 times, before the words sank in. Behind her, she felt Cass reading over her shoulder, his presence solid and warm. "He's dead," she said unnecessarily. "Edward is dead." The courier cleared his throat. "There are additional documents, ma'am, requiring immediate attention." She took the portfolio with numb fingers. Legal papers, bank statements, deeds, a fortune in paper and promises, more money than she'd ever dreamed of touching. The life she'd been raised for, trained for, before that night when everything went wrong. "I'll need time to review these," she managed. "Of course. I'm staying at the hotel in town. But I should mention, time is of the essence. There are those who would challenge your claim if you delay. After he left, Ellie spread the papers across the kitchen table. The numbers swam before her eyes. Thousands, tens of thousands. The house on Lafayette Street, the shipping interests, the cotton holdings. Everything her father had built. Everything Edward had preserved and expanded, waiting for her signature. "You should go," Cass said quietly. She looked up sharply. "What?" "It's a fortune, Ellie, the kind of money that changes lives. You could what abandon everything we've built here leave you?" Her voice rose. "Is that what you think of me? I think you deserve better than a 2-room cabin and chickens that barely lay." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "I think you were born to silk, not calico. I think—" "Stop!" She stood, moved around the table to face him. "Look at me, Cassidy Morgan. Look at me and tell me you want me to go." He did look then, and she saw everything in his eyes. Fear, love, the terrible certainty that he wasn't enough. "I want you to be happy." "I am happy. Here. With you." She took his hands, rough and scarred from work. "That girl who lived in Charleston, who wore silk and knew which fork to use. She died that night Edward tried to force her into marriage with his business partner. She's been dead far longer than he has. But the money is blood money, built on suffering, maintained by cruelty." She thought of the ledgers she'd once seen, the human cargo reduced to numbers. "I won't touch it." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't that simple. There were legal obligations, tax requirements, challenges to be answered. And Josephine was right. Others would claim what she refused if she didn't act. "I have to go back," she said finally. "Not to stay. Just to end it properly. To sell what can be sold, free what can be freed." She squeezed his hands. "Come with me. Ellie, come with me. Let them see that I'm not alone, not available, not the desperate girl they remember." She managed a smile. "Besides, I'll need someone to keep me from drowning in all those forks at dinner." The journey to Charleston took 2 weeks by rail and coach, each mile eastward feeling like a step backward in time. Cass was uncomfortable from the start, in the new suit she'd insisted on buying him, in the first-class railway car, in the entire notion of entering her old world. But he came, steady and solid beside her, a reminder of who she'd become. Charleston hadn't changed, still beautiful, still proud, still rotting beneath its genteel surface. The house on Lafayette Street stood exactly as she remembered, down to the magnolia tree where she'd hidden as a child. But stepping through the door was like entering a tomb. Josephine greeted them in the parlor, elegant in morning black. Her eyes widened slightly at Cass, but breeding one out. "Eleanor, and this must be Mr. Morgan, how unexpected." "My husband," Ellie said firmly. "Where I go, he goes." The next days were a whirlwind of lawyers and papers, of former friends who suddenly remembered her existence, of social calls that felt like evaluations. Cass endured it all with grim determination, but she could see the toll it took. This world of subtle cruelties and poisoned smiles was foreign to him, more hostile than any frontier conflict. The worst came at a dinner party Josephine insisted they attend. Judge Morrison, Edward's old friend, had too much bourbon and too little sense. "So you're the man who bought Edward's sister at auction," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Tell me, what does quality breeding cost these days in the territories?" The room went silent. Ellie felt Cass tense beside her, saw his hands curl into fists. In the desert, such words would mean gunplay. Here, violence took different forms. "About the same as honor costs in Charleston," Ellie said sweetly. "Which is to say, it's rarely found and often counterfeited." She turned to the judge's wife. "How is your nephew, by the way? Still in that northern sanitarium? Such a shame about the embezzlement scandal." The conversation lurched to safer topics, but the damage was done. That night, in their hotel room, Cass sat on the bed like a man defeated. "I don't belong here," he said. "These people, they look at me and see dirt, see failure, They see what they want to see." Ellie knelt before him, took his face in her hands. "I see the man who saved me, who chose mercy over revenge, who loves me exactly as I am, not as some prize to be won or bred." She kissed him, fierce and possessive. "One more week, then we're done with this place forever." But the next morning brought news that changed everything. Mr. Hartwell arrived early, face grave. "There's been a development," he said. "Your brother had a will we've just discovered. Recent. It leaves everything to a distant cousin in Virginia. Claims you're deceased. But I'm clearly not. The will is dated after reports of your death reached Charleston. The cousin is already mounting a legal challenge. If you want any part of the estate, we'll need to fight. It could take months, years, perhaps." Ellie felt the walls closing in. Months in Charleston. Fighting for money she didn't want, trapped in a world she'd escaped. She looked at Cass, saw her own desperation mirrored in his eyes. "No," she said. Hartwell blinked. "I beg your pardon." "No, let the cousin have it, all of it." She stood, pulled Cass up with her. "Draw up whatever papers need signing. I renounce all claim to the Whitfield estate." "And Mrs. Morgan, you don't understand. We're talking about a fortune." "I understand perfectly. Some prices are too high to pay." She thought of Cass in the desert, choosing mercy, of the Apache leader, choosing peace. "I choose my life, my real life, not this performance." Josephine was horrified. "Eleanor, think you're throwing away everything?" "No," Ellie said, feeling lighter with he signed the papers that afternoon. By evening, they were on a train heading west, the Charleston lights fading behind them like a bad dream. Cass hadn't spoken since they'd left the lawyers on money. He up a fortune for me, for us, for our life. It wasn't a hard choice. She leaned into him, felt him press a kiss to her hair. "That money came from pain. Our life comes from love. Easy trade." "I love you," he said. "Have I mentioned that today?" "Only a dozen times. You're slacking, Mr. Morgan." They laughed, there in their private compartment racing away from Charleston's poisoned paradise. And Ellie felt the last chains break. She was no longer Eleanor Whitfield, disgraced daughter of privilege, Morgan, ranch wife, survivor, woman who chose love over fortune. When they finally reached home 2 weeks later, the desert had never bed. "Cass gave her something while you were dealing with the lawyers," he said shyly. "Figured if you were going to give up diamonds, you should have something." She slipped it on next to her simple wedding band. It was rough, imperfect, honest, everything Charleston wasn't, everything their life together was. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. "No regrets." "None. Never." She kissed him, long and deep. "I was the last bride left at the border town auction. You raised your hand and saved me. Everything else, the money, the past, Charleston, that's just noise. This is what matters." Outside, coyotes sang to the moon, and the desert wind whispered secrets. But inside their cabin, two people who'd chosen each other over everything else the world could offer held tight and knew they were home. The ghosts of Charleston couldn't follow where love had already staked its claim. The September sun painted the desert gold. Exactly 1 year since Ellie had stood on that auction platform. She paused in hanging laundry to shade her eyes, watching the dust cloud that meant riders approaching. These days, visitors usually meant neighbors coming to trade goods or share news, maybe seek Cass's help with horses or repairs. But something in the way these riders moved, purposeful, organized, made her call out, "Cass Company coming." He emerged from the corral where he'd been working with a young mare, immediately alert. Together they watched 3 riders approach, well-dressed men on fine horses, not the usual ranch folk or drifters. The lead writer tipped his hat. Mrs. Morgan. My name is Harrison Wells. I represent the Territorial Authority. We're here about the chapel. Chapel? Ellie exchanged confused glances with Cass. There's no chapel here. Not yet. Wells dismounted, pulled out official-looking papers. But there will be. The Territory has approved funding for local infrastructure, including a chapel and schoolhouse for this district. Your ranch sits at the geographic center of 3 settlements. We'd like to build here, with your permission. Cass stepped forward, suspicious. Why would you need our permission? Territory wants something. It usually just takes it. Times are changing. Mr. Morgan, we're trying to do things proper now, legal-like. Wells spread a map on their porch rail. The chapel would sit here, on that flat stretch near the creek, the schoolhouse beside it. You'd deed the land to the Territory, but you'd be named as trustees, caretakers, if you will. A school, Ellie breathed. She thought of Margaret, teaching children of all backgrounds, of the Apache children growing up between 2 worlds. There'd be a teacher. Eventually, for now, we're hoping local folks might step in. Someone educated, patient. His eyes lingered meaningfully on Ellie. That evening, they sat by the fire discussing it. The idea of their isolated ranch becoming a community center seemed impossible. Yet, Margaret would have loved it, Cass said finally. A place for folks to gather, kids to learn. She always said education was the only way to build bridges. But it would change everything. The quiet, the solitude. Maybe change isn't always bad. He took her hand. We've been hiding here. Ellie, both of us. Maybe it's time to stop. The construction began in October, bringing workers and noise and controlled chaos to their quiet corner of the desert. Ellie found herself playing hostess, making countless pots of coffee, organizing meals. Cass supervised the building, his natural skill with wood and stone making him indispensable. It was during this time that Reverend Thomas arrived, a young minister fresh from seminary, all earnest enthusiasm and Eastern ideas about civilizing the frontier. He took one look at their simple life and began making suggestions. Perhaps, Mrs. Morgan, you might consider more appropriate attire for a trustee's wife, he said, eyeing her work dress. And Mr. Morgan, about your associations with the local tribes. Reverend, Ellie interrupted sweetly. Have you ever delivered a baby in a dust storm? What, no, of course not. Treated snake bites, survived a winter with no supplies. Faced down men who'd as soon shoot you as speak to you. Well, no, but then perhaps you might consider that what's appropriate in Boston might get you killed out here. She smiled to take the sting out. Now, would you like more coffee? The Apache leader visited during construction, studying the rising walls with unreadable eyes. The workers tensed, hands drifting to weapons, but Cass greeted him like the friend he'd become. A gathering place, the leader observed, for all people. That's the idea, Cass said. Your children would be welcome at the school. And in the chapel. Any god who can't make room for all his children isn't worth worshipping, Ellie said firmly, ignoring Reverend Thomas's shocked gasp. The leader smiled. Your woman speaks wisdom. He dismounted, picked up a hammer. We will help build. And they did. Over the following weeks, Apache workers joined the construction crew. There were tensions, old wounds that ached in proximity, but gradually something else emerged. Shared purpose, tentative respect, the beginning of what Margaret had dreamed of. The chapel was finished by November, modest but sturdy, with windows that caught the morning light. The schoolhouse beside it boasted real slate boards and desks Cass built himself. The dedication ceremony was set for December 1st. We need to discuss the ceremony, Reverend Thomas said one evening. As trustees, you'll need to speak, and Mrs. Morgan, about your past. What about it? Cass's voice carried warning. Well, There have been questions about the circumstances of your marriage, the auction. Is this about God or gossip? Ellie asked. Because last I checked, the Bible had more to say about love and redemption than about maintaining social proprieties. The Reverend flushed. I simply want to avoid scandal. Then you're in the wrong territory, Cass said flatly. Everyone here has a past. Question is whether we're building on it or burying it. The morning of the dedication dawned clear and cold. Ellie stood before her mirror in the cabin, wearing her best dress, still simple by Charleston standards, but clean and pressed. The iron ring Cass had made caught the light beside her wedding band. You ready for this? Cass asked from the doorway. To stand up in front of everyone, to be official, public, permanent. She turned to him. I've been ready since you raised your hand at that auction. The crowd that gathered surprised them, ranchers from miles around, townsfolk, even a delegation from the territorial government. And there, at the back, the Apache leader with several families, children wide-eyed at the new buildings. Reverend Thomas, to his credit, had taken their words to heart. His sermon spoke of new beginnings, of communities built on acceptance rather than judgment. When it came time for the trustees to speak, Cass went first. My wife Margaret believed in this dream, he said simply. Believed that different people could learn from each other, grow together. She died before she could see it happen. But Ellie, he looked at her, love plain on his face. Ellie helped me believe again, in second chances, in building something better from broken pieces. Then it was Ellie's turn. She looked out at the crowd, at faces curious and skeptical, friendly and hostile. At the back, she caught the Apache leader's eye, saw his small nod of encouragement. A year ago, I stood on a platform in town, the last bride nobody wanted. She heard the intake of breath, the rustle of whispers, but continued. I was bought by a man everyone called a ghost, two broken people trying to make a life from leftover pieces. She found Cass in the crowd, drew strength from his steady gaze. But here's what I learned. Broken doesn't mean worthless. Different doesn't mean wrong. And sometimes the best families, the strongest communities, are the ones we choose to build rather than the ones we're born to. She gestured to the chapel, the school. This place isn't about forgetting who we were. It's about choosing who we'll be, together, all of us. The silence that followed felt eternal. Then, from the back, the Apache leader began to clap. Others joined. Mrs. Patterson from town, the workers who'd built alongside Apache laborers, ranchers who'd known too much loss to judge others for their scars. After the ceremony, as people explored the new buildings and children raced between the pews, the Apache leader approached Ellie. You spoke truth, he said. My people, we know about being broken and rebuilt, about choosing new paths. He handed her something, a small leather pouch. For the school, from our medicine woman. Seeds for healing plants. Teach the children to grow medicine alongside letters. That evening, after everyone had gone, Ellie and Cass stood alone in the chapel. Sunlight slanted through windows, painting everything gold. No regrets, Cass asked, echoing his question from months before. None. She leaned into him. We did it, Cass. Built something from nothing. From everything, he corrected. From pain and hope and choice and love. Outside, they could hear children playing, Apache and Mexican and white, their laughter mixing like streams joining a river. Tomorrow, Ellie would start teaching, Cass would train horses, life would continue its daily rhythms. But tonight, in this moment, they stood in the chapel they'd built on the ground of their love and knew they'd found their place. She was the last bride left at the border town auction, Cass said softly. Then a broken cowboy raised his hand and saved himself in the bargain. Ellie finished. They walked home hand in hand as stars emerged in the desert sky. Behind them, The chapel stood solid against the horizon, a testament to second chances, unlikely love, and the truth that sometimes the best endings come from the worst beginnings. In the cabin that night, as they lay entwined, Ellie thought about their journey, from auction block to trustees, from strangers to soulmates, from isolation to community. It hadn't been easy or painless, but it had been theirs. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "And I love you," he replied. "My last bride, my first true choice." Outside, the desert wind sang through the chapel bells, a sound like benediction, and in the morning there would be children to teach, horses to train, life to live fully and freely. The ghosts were gone. In their place stood hope, solid as adobe, lasting as love, bright as the Arizona sun on a schoolhouse window where all children were welcome to learn. Two broken souls had found each other in the wilderness and built something whole. It was, Ellie thought as sleep claimed her, the only miracle that truly mattered. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, redemption, and second chances in the Old West. I hope Ellie and Cass's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please leave a comment below and let's connect over our shared love of these frontier tales. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night, give this video a like, and hit that hype button to help more people discover these stories of the American frontier. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunset. Happy trails.